Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm here with my co-hosts.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, 1960s swinging sex orgy man.
That is what you are. You know, it's a perfect description there.
I missed my time.
Exactly. You missed your time period. But we're in the thick of that time period here in this season of Awesome Movie Year because we're talking about the films of 1967. And in this episode, we are talking about the Palme d'Or winner at the Cannes Film Festival, the very swingin' Blowup from director Michelangelo Antonioni, starring David Hemmings and Vanessa Redgrave and
photographs.
Lots of photographs and lots of swinging 60s outfits and music and
some sexy sexer stuff.
Yep, that too.
That they did in the 60s.
And they continue to, I hear.
Maybe not the same way anymore.
Maybe not. It's different ways. But also art. Lots of, this is an artistically ambitious film. I mean, it won the Palme d'Or. That's a prestigious and serious prize. And it was also nominated for 2 Oscars, for Best Director for Michelangelo Antonioni and for Best Original Screenplay for the screenplay that he co-wrote for this film. It was actually released in December 1966 in the US. And despite this very European art house film, it was released here in the US before in Europe. So played at Cannes in 1967 and then released in various places in 67. So ahead of the curve here in the US in a small way.
Yeah, so the screenplay was co-written by Tonino Guerra. And I think some of the English dialogue was through Edward Bond, who I think was like a playwright, kind of art facilitator of sorts.
Yeah, he's credited with the English language dialogue, and I wonder how much English they spoke, either of those, Antonioni or his co-writer. So Bond may be responsible for a lot of what we actually hear.
And the whole thing is based on a short story, Las Babas del Diablo by Julio Cortázar, 1959. Did you know that?
I mean, I saw that on Wikipedia. I didn't read the short story, but I have to wonder, given how kind of abstract this movie is at a lot of times, in a way that is only possible in a movie, in a visual medium, what the story does in terms of plot.
Maybe it's a picture book.
I don't think so. I didn't look it up. I don't know if it's easily available to read, and especially in English, but yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say, Josh, is like you said, it was kind of released ahead of the time and ahead of, as we talked about, the kind of MPAA rating. So it had like a kind of like a indie style release, like a real independent distributor release. And it made a lot of money for especially a foreign art film at the time.
It did. It made $20 million worldwide on its $1.8 million budget. So that is quite a lot. Although that may include re-releases. I'm not sure. Sometimes these numbers are hard to verify, but even if so, like, that's a lot of money to bring in, as you say, for this very artsy movie. Whether you like this movie or not, I mean, it's certainly not a mainstream kind of thing.
Right. And I mean, how do you even advertise this in the mid 60s? When is it an unrated release? Like we said, the MPAA wasn't there yet. I mean, it's a very unique situation, I think.
Right. The MPAA wasn't there. There were no ratings yet. Those came into being in 1968. And so this was the last gasp of the production code. And this was released without production code approval. And again, by this point, it was not as difficult to do that. There was a period of time, 40s, 50s, where no movie would really get any kind of release, even though independent films did get released that way. But anything mainstream that's going to reach a big audience would have to have approval. But at this point, it's kind of weakening. And even though I think is it MGM? It was a big studio that financed this film. And then they released it through like a subsidiary to get that indie release and to get around the production code. But I think that, in a way, movies like that, you market it as like, oh, this is a movie that they didn't want you to see, that kind of thing, and you use that naughtiness or the illicitness of it.
It's funny. I was talking to someone who saw this when he said he was like 12 years old, right?
Was it Dave?
Yeah, right?
Your parents showed it to you?
Yeah, Dave. So that it would have been like 5 at the time, but
Oh, yeah.
he saw it when he was 12, and it's the mid 60s, right?
Yeah.
Clearly, no internet. That's a fact for you guys out there.
Mhm,
And he's
sure.
like, that's why I had to go see it. There was all this sexiness and there's nudity, and it's like, as a
Right.
12-year-old boy, this was a thing I had to do. So
Yeah. What else are you gonna do?
I don't want to answer that.
Yeah. So this person like knew about it though and went to the theater on his own initiative at 12 to see this movie because it was sexy.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So that answers it. That's how it, reached its audience.
But it's funny because it's weird. We grew up in the 80s, the time of teen sexploitation comedy movies, right? And like, he's like, it was sexy and I had to go see it. And I'm like, that would have been like Porky's for us or something
Yeah.
like that. This might be the first time in history someone's compared Blowup to Porky's or something along those lines.
Slightly more artistically ambitious, this film, than Porky's. And well regarded by critics, and very it's interesting reading reviews from this time because a lot of these critics get so much more space to write than you look at reviews now and they're all short and quick and everything, but a lot of intellectual analysis going on with this movie, not surprisingly.
You sound very like whimsical, like this is something you miss, like
Yeah,
you want more space for your writing.
no, I mean, actually on the internet you can, of course, I mean, there's no physical limits, there's limits in terms of what various websites want to publish, but I do get a chance to go long, but it's just interesting to read these long articles that were like the first reviews of this movie were just really long, and other movies too. So, but my point being that critics really dug into this. So it's a little tough to kind of condense these into basic opinions, but I did my best. Starting with Bosley Crowther in the New York Times, who is known for being kind of stuffy, but he was a big fan of this. He said, "This is a fascinating picture, which has something real to say about the matter of personal involvement and emotional commitment in a jazzed up, media hooked in world so cluttered with synthetic stimulations that natural feelings are overwhelmed. It is vintage Antonioni fortified with a Hitchcock twist, and it is beautifully photographed in color. One may have reservations toward this picture. It is redundant and long. There are the usual Antonioni passages of seemingly endless wanderings. The interest may be too much concentrated in the one character, and the symbolistic conclusions may be too romantic for the mood. It is still a stunning picture, beautifully built up with glowing images and color compositions that get us into the feelings of our man and into the characteristics of the mod world in which he dwells. There is even exciting vitality in the routine business of his using photographs, prints and blow-ups and superimpositions to bring a thought, a preconception alive." And I think his minor detour into criticizing this film is probably along the lines of our reaction to it.
Our major points of it. What twist is he talking about? I watched the movie and I was never like, ooh, there's a twist.
I mean, I think he's using twist in the sense of that, like, it's a twist on what you would expect from Antonioni.
Oh.
That, he hasn't made movies that involve this element
Sure.
of suspense or mystery before.
Right. It's like usually two people at a cafe talking about how unhappy they are in their relationship or something along those lines.
Exactly. It's the seemingly endless wanderings that he mentions.
Yeah. I mean, look, he makes beautiful looking movies. So
True,
Let's
he
go with
does.
that.
And this movie does look beautiful. I mean, it captures that aesthetic of the mod London world.
right. It did make you feel like you wanted to be a part of it, other than, the murder and stuff.
Right, but the murder is so secondary that
If you want to live in a swinging society, baby, you got to accept a few murders here and there.
we live in a swinging society. So Andrew Saris in The Village Voice loved this. He said, "Michelangelo Antonioni's Blowup is the movie of the year. And I use the term movie advisedly for an evening's entertainment that left me feeling no pain, or Antonioni ennui." I can't, he's combined those words, whatsoever. "It is possible that this year's contributions from Ford, Dreyer, Hitchcock, Chabrol, and Godard may cut deeper and live longer than Antonioni's mod masterpiece, but no other movie this year has done as much to preserve my faith in the future of the medium. If you have not yet seen Blowup, see it immediately before you hear or read anything more about it. I speak from personal experience when I say it is better to let the movie catch you completely unawares. One of its greatest virtues is surprise, and the last thing you want to know is the plot and theme in advance. Purely on a plot level, Blowup provides more thrills, chills, and fancy frissons than any other movie this year.
Man, we just what?
Yeah, I
Did we
figured
watch
you
the
were going to
same
have that
movie?
response to that. Yeah.
It's wild, dude.
Yeah,
so
it's crazy.
this is not how I felt about the movie, Josh.
Yeah, I didn't either. And I feel like even if you think this movie is brilliant, I think one of the problems is going into this movie expecting it to do what he says there, to thrill you and chill you with the plot, because the plot is almost like Antonioni is reluctant to even include it.
Yeah, I mean, and I didn't know much about it going in, right? And I in a way I listened to Mr. Saris.
By the way, the rest of the review literally goes through the entire plot up to the final shot of the movie.
I know that's a big thing that you like in older reviews where they just spoil the whole movie for you and everything.
Yeah.
But imagine the amount of notes you had to take while watching a movie back then.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And I mean, I started reviewing movies in a time when, I mean, I was always able to look things up on the internet, but there were still a lot of press notes. And, you know, they would provide you with stuff. In fact, for some research that I did on another movie, reviews talk about the notes that they were given, including like transcripts, in order to properly do the review.
What a hot tease, Josh.
Yeah, I know, it's very exciting stuff, and I don't even think it's mentioned in what we're going to talk about there. But to your point here, yes, you would have to take a lot of notes, but they were provided with some info.
I guess, like, if I'm distilling it, if you watch a Hitchcock movie and you don't like it, you can still see why people would call it exciting, right? But whatever the twist, the turns, the suspense, some of the action pieces, right? But here I just don't see what the excitement is. I felt a very large lack of excitement throughout the entire picture.
You felt that Antonioni that Andrew Saris is talking about there.
I wanted to say Antonioni.
Yeah. But I mean, I think you're right. Like, I can see why people would like this movie, but I definitely can't see the appeal of it from that standpoint of, wow, the plot was so exciting and thrilling and engrossing.
Right.
You know, it barely exists. And there is one scene. I mean, for anyone who doesn't know, the plot of this movie, which is very minimal and doesn't even really come in until more than halfway through the movie, is that the main character, who's a photographer, takes these pictures in a park, sort of clandestinely, of these two lovers, and discovers later on, when he develops the pictures, that he has inadvertently photographed someone murdering this man that he took a photo of. So, I mean, that sounds interesting, right? But and the scene or the sequence where the main character is realizing what he's captured, and he's develops these photographs, and he
blows them up.
He blows them up, exactly. He keeps doing that. But, you know, at first he just is looking at them normally, and then realizes there's something there and goes back again and again. And of course, the process of how you develop it would be much less exciting now with just like pinching and zooming.
Sure.
But the process, like, is a good sequence and is suspenseful, I think, that one part of the movie. But
I agree with you. That is, and, you know, it shows like someone who is very good at their profession using their technique to take them somewhere they didn't expect with it. And I always like that in film.
Right. I think that is fascinating. And it sort of leads you to think that, like, okay, we've now spent an hour just kind of getting the mood of the swinging 60s London and getting to know this sort of jerk of a character. And now we're going to really get to the meat of the story. And almost immediately, again, Antonioni undercuts that with the lack of urgency on the movie's part and on the character's part to figure out what's going on. And I think that is a deliberate choice to not satisfy the audience with the quote answers to the plot.
If I'm not mistaken, isn't the next scene after like this discovery of him having the three-way with those two models,
right,
that he like would definitely be Me Too'd for, and the way he it's a very weird, I guess, 60s sequence, but it's like these girls are like telling him to back off and no, and he just like pulls their, clothes off and they're like, okay, sex now. And it's like, what? That is a different society than we are used to, sir.
Yeah, that doesn't, it's sort of ambiguous there, whether, because as you say, they are at first pushing him away and then they seem to be into it eventually, but it's hard to say whether they really are.
Yes, it does seem like everyone is a willing participant eventually,
yeah. Right. And you wonder, like, are they really, or they're just going along with it because they think he can help them become models or whatever. But I mean, that's not even, the movie doesn't even care about any of that. Right. It's not asking you those questions.
Right. It's just a strange detour, like after you have this major plot point to go like, okay, now we'll do this.
Right. And that is what it is, where, I mean, and you could argue, I suppose, that it demonstrates this character's sort of priorities and the fact that he doesn't, even though he seems to be really shaken up by having caught this murder at certain points in the movie, he seems to have been emotionally affected by it. But at the same time, he doesn't care that much.
Yeah. I mean, I think some would compare that scene to when in Porky's, the guy puts his penis through the peephole and the female students or teacher just grabs it. And you're like, oh, blow up.
Yeah, I've never seen Porky's, so I have no idea if that's a real scene or not.
I'm almost sure it's a real scene, at least from one of the Porky's. I don't know if it's the first one, but it's one of them. There's multiple Porky's. Right.
Yeah, there are multiple Porky's, but only one blow up.
Yeah.
So I did like, okay, so Pauline Kael in the New Yorker, and this is another great thing about reviews at this time period, is that there aren't nearly as many film critics then as there are now, and they all know each other. And so many of the reviews that I find involve like these critics complaining about each other. So I would say probably 75% of Pauline Kael's review is her trashing the other critics.
Well, that's great. We do love that catty, gossipy nonsense stuff.
We do. But she's doing it in service of the idea that she hates this movie and thinks that everyone who loves it is being a pretentious jerk.
I like that even better.
I like her. Yeah.
So she says, will Blow Up be taken seriously in 1968 only by the same sort of cultural diehards who are still sending out 5-page single-spaced letters on their interpretation of Last Year at Marienbad? No two are alike, no one interesting. It has some of the Marienbad appeal. A friend phones for your opinion, and when you tell him you didn't much care for it, he says, you'd better see it again. I was at a swinging party the other night, and it's all anybody talked about. Was there ever a good movie that everybody was talking about? People identify with it so strongly, they get upset if you don't like it, as if you were rejecting not just the movie, but them. And in a way, they're right, because if you don't accept the peculiarly slugged consciousness of Blow Up, you are rejecting something in them. Antonioni's new mixture of suspense with vagueness and confusion seems to have a kind of numbing fascination for them that they associate with art and intellectuality, and they are responding to it as their film, and hence as a masterpiece. Antonioni, like his fashion photographer hero, is more interested in getting pretty pictures than in what they mean. But for reasons I can't quite fathom, what is taken to be shallow in his hero is taken to be profound in him. Maybe it's because of the symbols. Do pretty pictures plus symbols equal art? And she clearly thinks no. And then goes on for many, many, many more paragraphs. It's a very long review, but
what is that film she's talking about there that she's comparing it to?
Oh, Last Year at Marienbad,
yeah,
the Alain Resnais film, which is, you think Blow Up is pretentious. Blow Up is nothing compared to Last Year at Marienbad.
Ooh.
But that is like, I mean, as she points out, not only here in her time, and it came out, I don't know exactly when, but it seems probably a couple years before this, but even, I mean, is one regarded as one of the great French films of all time. And I remember seeing that film in college and hating it.
Yeah.
Far more so than Blow Up, because it is just like ennui and vague pronouncements about existence, and it has no plot. And yeah, but I mean, it's been a very long time since I saw it.
I don't even know that movie. And I know that there are more than one Porky's in this series. So I'm clearly a film historian.
Clearly.
But she uses the word suspense. I mean, I get it. But the suspense, like you said, like he just deflates it at every possible juncture. So there really is no suspense in this film.
Right. I mean, again, I think the idea is that he's adding that element to what he's done before, and that any amount of suspense or any amount of like plot elements that hint at suspense are new for him. And she obviously is saying, she's sort of undercutting him too by saying he's mixing it with vagueness and confusion. And she obviously does not think that that's a positive. But I mean, I think to me, that's one of the frustrating things, that I almost would like this movie more if there weren't a plot of any kind, or at least the murder plot didn't exist, because then he wouldn't be, you wouldn't be frustrated. You wouldn't get the sense of, oh, wow, what's going on here? And then completely never get to find out anything about what's going on. And I realize that's the point, is that things are unknowable or mysteries don't really resolve in a satisfying way or whatever, but it just makes the movie even more frustrating to watch.
In some of my research on it, Ronan O'Casey, who plays the gentleman who was murdered, said that in the script there was an explanation of the murder and they just didn't film it because they went over budget. And it seems like maybe those were scenes you should have prioritized over some of the other scenes there.
Maybe. I mean, it's also, I think people don't necessarily, he's saying that, but there's no like confirmation that that's true.
That's true.
But he may very well be right. And I think, yes, another filmmaker would prioritize those things, but clearly Antonioni has different kinds of priorities just in a filmmaking sense.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
So, had you seen this one before, Jason? I mean, this is like, we should say, as much as Pauline Kael and we are kind of crapping on it, this is considered like one of the greatest films ever.
Yeah, I know. I don't like it. I hadn't seen it before. It's not my first rodeo with Mr. Antonioni, but I think maybe he and I, we just are better off at separate ends of the party there.
Yeah, that's fair. I saw this because of its reputation, I don't know exactly when, 10 or more years ago, probably. And I remember not liking it at the time. And I think partly because I had these expectations of this is this great film, and also with the plot. It's known for that plot. And you watch the movie and you realize the plot is so unimportant in so many ways. So, I think coming back to it this time, I knew that would be the case. And I remembered not liking it, and I maybe appreciated it a little more just in terms of the way it captures London and just some of the aesthetic elements. But overall, I still didn't enjoy it.
Yeah, I like the way he utilizes cityscapes. And he does that very well in all his movies, at least the ones that I've seen, and yeah, you do get that feel for what London is, and you're just waiting for David Bowie to come on top of the pops at some point in time. But yeah, I don't know, that's not enough to make a movie work for me. As you said, Josh, very well regarded. The French Syndicate of Cinema Critics gave it Best Foreign Film. The National Society of Film Critics gave it Best Film and Best Director. And you mentioned the Academy nod. So we're just not swinging in the mod scene, I guess.
No. And I will say, despite appreciating some of those elements more, I still overall didn't care for it. And I've only seen one other Antonioni, but I feel like I'm probably not quite on his wavelength either. I should say, there's a number of other films of his that are also considered, among the greatest in cinema that I'm sure I should see. But at the same time, I wouldn't expect much in terms of my own enjoyment. So, Dave, had you seen this one?
No, I hadn't. I certainly knew its reputation. And after I watched it, I was so determined to get on his wavelength. I watched 2 more of his movies in a row. And I, just like Jason, I do not belong watching his movies.
Which 2 did you watch?
The Passenger and La Ventura.
Yeah. So Josh and I have both seen The Passenger. I haven't seen it in a very, very long time.
Yeah.
So I saw it in college, and I remember being like, oh, okay. So,
yeah, I remember I liked it. I saw it a little more recently than that. It's been a while. I saw it when it got a big re-release. And I think I went into it thinking, oh, I'm not going to like this, probably because I didn't like Blowup. And I like The Passenger has more of a plot.
Sure.
I think that might have the most plot of any Antonioni movie.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's been a while, but I remember finding that a bit more engaging, and Jack Nicholson's performance. And I liked that, but it's been a long time.
But if I'm not mistaken, the reason it wasn't released when it was filmed was because Nicholson had some of the rights or whatever, and he did not want it released. So
Well,
You never
he was
know.
good in it. I mean, maybe he doesn't know what's best.
He knows how to be as good as it gets.
Thank you.
No, he was good in it, and I didn't see La Ventura. I watched La Notte after this
Okay.
or before this recently, and I felt the same about this as I felt about that, where it's just like so meandering and just never picks up. It's just maybe he's just not for us, Dave.
Right. And by the way, I agree. Passenger was my favorite of the three, but that's not exactly saying a lot.
Right. And I wouldn't say that I loved it, but I think at the time I went back and looked at my review that I wrote at the time, and it was fairly positive. And there's one shot, there's like a long take. There's like the second to last shot of the passenger that I remember being just blown away by. But of course, I don't remember exactly what it was. But in my review, I said it was amazing. And I remember sitting on my couch at home watching it and feeling that kind of ennui. And it's toward the end of the movie, which is kind of long. And like literally, as that shot kept going, like sitting up on my couch and being like, whoa, like it re-engaged me there in the movie. But yeah.
So just picturing this at this point, you were lying down.
I don't know if I was lying down, but maybe I was like, kind of leaning back a bit or something. And, I was like, all right, this is almost over. And then it just really caught my attention again.
Yeah. Well, that's not the movie we're talking about today. So
no,
good for that. Josh.
Right. Yeah. This one I did not have that moment. So but again, I will say, as I said before, the one really good sequence in this movie where he's figuring out what's going on and blowing up the photos, I think is really like legitimately thrilling and suspenseful.
Well, Josh, that is a perfect thing to talk about in our next segment when we discuss our general thoughts on Blowup.
Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1967, we've been talking about the Palme d'Or winner at the Cannes Film Festival, Michelangelo Antonioni's Blowup, which we don't like, I guess.
No, and it's a bummer. We want to like movies and we want to connect with the Palme d'Or winners. And for the most part, I think we have. There's a few hit and misses in there, but this one, yeah, I mean, it's not too long, so I can't really use that as a thing. It just never picks up. And then, when you think it does, like, there's a scene where he's taking the pictures and he thinks that he saw something, but he's not sure. And, he goes to the restaurant to meet like his agent type guy. And then there's a guy who like looks in the restaurant, like, who clearly is, making sure that he doesn't have any evidence of whatever was going on. And that guy disappears and never comes back. And Vanessa Redgrave is so concerned with getting the pictures. And then she has sex with the guy for no reason. And it's like, well, does anything mean anything? Maybe that's the point.
That is the point, I think. Yeah.
But it just didn't hook me. What else did you like about it? Anything beyond what we talked about? Herbie Hancock, the soundtrack.
Yeah, I mean, the soundtrack is great. Like, I feel like this movie, even though it was made in 1966 or whatever, this movie feels like a movie that would be made now to parody the 60s. Like, I kept waiting for Austin Powers to show up, so that stuff is great. Yeah, the Herbie Hancock soundtrack and the music when we get to see the Yardbirds perform, which is one of the only documents of their lineup with both Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page. I mean, that's an amazing 60s thing that, of course, they didn't know at the time would be so amazing.
Yeah, it's just totally irrelevant to everything. But Josh, like you said, you're seeing the Yardbirds, and it could be a really cool sequence but it doesn't really have any relevance to the plot, and you're waiting for some type of relevance to the plot. And then what happens is, they smash the guitar and he gets the neck of it, and it's, turns out to be like a valuable item because it's from the Yardbirds, but he just throws it out. And then some dude picks it up off the street and is like, guitar neck, I don't want it. And I get it that that's symbolic of like what is valuable, is anything valuable, but it just kind of like the whole thing, just since it has no meaning throughout, like it doesn't mean anything there to me either.
Right. Yeah. I think you can look at that scene and understand the symbolism, which, as you said, is the idea of what is valuable, that in the context of being inside the concert with all the fans, it's incredibly valuable and they're like attacking him to get it. But once he's out on the street, with people who don't know what it is, it's just a piece of trash. You can understand that and yet also feel like, who cares?
Right. And why was it placed where it was placed? Because at that point, we're getting to whatever climax there is. And then it's like, here's another detour, and a long detour there.
Yes, because they play like a whole song almost.
It's the Yardbirds, man.
I mean, it's a good song. Like
Yeah.
this, as I was saying, the music here is good. Their music, the Herbie Hancock music, all of it is very 60s, but is very good.
Yes. And now if we're looking for something else positive in this film, I'll tell you what I loved was the studio that the main character inhabits as a work and living space. I thought that was an amazing looking place. And I know that this character is kind of based on some of those like more popular photographers of the 1960s. I think this David Bailey might have been his workspace actually, who was a real photographer. And Antonioni does a great job of utilizing the space, not just with the camera, but having Hemmings move about the space. So that was, to me, probably the most exciting element. I like when someone can take just one space and make it dynamic. Although this already is a dynamic space, he really does utilize it well.
Yeah, I agree. And it is, I mean, it's kind of cool to think that this is actually a real person's studio because it's so weird and the layout is so off kilter and everything. You think this must be a set that they built to kind of go along with the themes of what is real and all of that. But no, it is in fact real. And so I think that is cool. And all of the visual elements of this, the costumes, I mean, if he's capturing the style of the time, that London mod scene, they're very vibrant. And I like that. And the colors pop, the cinematography. I don't know if this was this Antonioni's first color film? I'm not sure, but I know he made black and white films earlier in his career. So the colors definitely pop. And
his first English language.
It is his first English language film, yes. But you can make a color film not in English. So I don't know if this is his first color film.
Well, did you learn that from Last Year in Marion Park?
Last Year at Marienbad, which is which is in black and white,
yeah,
and in French. But no, my point is the cinematography is good, and the costume is. I mean, even in moments where you're like, why is this person here, or why are they dressed that way, or whatever, it still looks cool. Like, why do we have mimes? Pauline Kael, by the way, spends like 3 paragraphs talking about mimes, which I did not include.
Well,
but
yeah, we should at least reference that. So the beginning and the end are kind of bookended with these like performance artists who I guess it would be closest to like a flash mob street performance style where they just go places and they're, like you said, dressed as mimes, and they just put on, I don't even want to say a show, but put on some type of artistic piece. In the end, they're pretending to play tennis, and the other people in the group are the spectators. And it doesn't matter to them if anyone's watching. It didn't seem to, but they were just doing it. So.
Right. Well, in the opening scene, they seem to be part of some kind of political protest.
Well, maybe in the end, they're protesting Wimbledon.
Maybe. But yeah, I don't really understand the mime thing. But one of the things, and I don't think this is available anymore, but Steven Soderbergh, who has this weird sideline of re-editing old films as like a hobby, and he'll sometimes post on his website, and he did a re-edit of this film that apparently removed the mimes, and I don't know what else he removed. But of course, it's
50% better at least.
Of course, it's like completely unauthorized, so you can't. It's not on his website anymore. So I don't know exactly how it looks, but this is one of the movies that he did that with. And I think, as much as maybe we don't like the mimes, I mean, Soderbergh, when he does these edits, it's because he thinks the movies are great and he has some sort of perspective he wants to offer. So I don't think it's like, oh, this is crap and I'm going to make it better.
What if that was part of like his Tinder profile or something? Like, you know, instead of like, I'm a foodie, I like adventures, you're like, your big trait is, I re-edit old Palme d'Or winners.
Well, other ones too. I'm trying to remember because he's done a few. The only other one I can think of is the edit he made of Psycho, where he combined the Hitchcock and Gus Van Sant versions.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, we love Soderbergh. So
right. And what I love about Soderbergh is that he's that much of a film nerd that's like what he does for fun.
Right. That's what I'm saying. And I'll also add that one movie he didn't recut was Porky's because it's perfect in its original form.
I doubt that that's true.
So, Josh, here's one problem, and we've talked about this thematically over multiple episodes, multiple seasons. The main character is a real dickhole, and it's very difficult to. You don't have to like the protagonist, but you have to like have some type of rooting interest for the protagonist. And this guy's such a knob, you just want to punch him in the face the whole time, right?
He is. And again, I feel like this is another one of the things where you get to that point where he discovers the murder and you think, oh, this is going to be kind of a growth thing for him emotionally. He's going to realize that he's got himself into a very serious situation and he needs to kind of take life seriously. And that is not what happened.
The whole world doesn't revolve around me, right? Which is the whole first hour. He just shows up late. He insults models but he's talented. So they're all put up with it, and yeah, you think this is a good point where like you could learn something, you could grow, you could change, you could do something good, but none of that does happen. So.
No, I mean, and I think that like the idea of never being able to solve the murder is probably at least part of the point here, that that's not how things work in real life. People don't become better. They're jerks and then they're still jerks.
You could become a better person.
You could, but most people don't.
Well, I mean, today there's such a true crime boom, right? And now it's all over streamers. I think podcasts really broke through and, we have all these amateur sleuths. That's what I was kind of comparing this to.
Did you wanted him to have a podcast?
No, I'm just saying this type of mood, not that all podcasters are jerks, although I know two in this room. What I'm saying is like, this feels like that type of energy to me of like, I took a photograph and now I can go do this. And, it kind of like the show Search Party, right? Where she's just doing a quest to have some type of meaning. Although really the meaning is she just wants to feel something in herself. That's what this whole thing felt like, which was like, hey, maybe I discovered a murder. Won't this be great for my career?
Right. Because what is the first thing that he does? Well, because he first doesn't realize that it's a murder. At first, he thinks he's just captured the guy with the gun and that actually his photograph, his being there, scared the guy off. And so the first thing that he does is he calls his agent and says, "You'll never believe these amazing photographs. This is so awesome for my upcoming book." So yeah, he clearly sees it that way.
Yeah. And this is David Hemmings, who was an unknown at the time and is fine in this movie. I found it interesting that it was originally going to be Terrence Stamp and they got rid of
Sean Connery too.
Right. But Connery turned it down, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Stamp was attached and then they just fired him, which is not a good move. You should never fire Terrence Stamp.
No, but I mean, like, not that Terrence Stamp isn't great or that Sean Connery isn't great, but I don't know how much better this movie would have been with either of them.
Right. The character is just so unlikable. One thing that would have made him more likable is if he said, "You're the man now, dog."
Yeah. And thank goodness we got that in there. I just watched a random Sean Connery movie yesterday, and he is great. I mean, not that that was ever in dispute, but it was a good reminder.
What movie was it?
It's a sci-fi movie called Outland from 1981. Recommend. Good movie.
Ooh, maybe that could be your pick if we do 1981 as a season.
It could be. So many previews for maybe upcoming things in this episode.
It's wild, just like the swinging 60s, Josh.
Oh, yeah. That it is. But yeah, I don't think you can fault David Hemmings all that much.
No, I mean, there's not. I said he's fine, right? I mean, just same thing with Vanessa Redgrave. Is that who's one of the most awarded and well-recognized actors ever, right? Is there anything to her character in here?
No. And as you say, she seems very inconsistent because she's so determined to get these photos. At first you think maybe because she's having some sort of affair, and then later because obviously there's been a murder. And yet once she comes to the studio, after a little while, she just has sex with him. Because that seems to be, he is much like Austin Powers, able to just get any woman to have sex with him. It seems like that's like his superpower.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, he gives her a fake roll of film. So is it like, did she sleep with him to get,
But he gives it to her first and then she sleeps with him.
Yeah.
So she could have just left.
Yeah. What about the scene where he walks in on his wife having sex with another man?
Is that his wife?
I felt like it was his wife.
I wasn't sure.
I don't think it is. I don't think he has a wife.
No, he says he has a wife.
But then he says he doesn't.
Man, blow up.
Right? This is a scene he gets a phone call when Vanessa Redgrave is with him. And he kind of jokes to her. He's like, oh, here, it's for you. And she picks up the phone. She's like, who is it? And he says, it's my wife.
Yeah.
And she gets all huffy and says, I don't want to talk to your wife. And then he just takes the phone back and says, I'll call you later or something, and hangs up. And then he says, like, oh, no, I don't actually have a wife. And he keeps just like messing with her. He's like, no, I don't have a wife. We just have some kids together. And then he's like, no, we don't actually have kids.
Right.
And so I think that woman she shows up in the beginning when he's kind of like all frustrated with his models who won't do exactly what he tells them to do. And he's really treating them terribly. And he just walks out on them and tells them to close their eyes and just leaves them there, which is a really dick move.
Yeah. I told you, he's not a good guy.
No, he's not. But then he walks across the street or next door or something to this house where there's a woman and a man who's a painter. I think they're married.
Man, it's the 60s. Everyone, I don't know. No, I thought it was his wife. I know the scene you're talking about, and I thought, he was backtracking to get back in her good graces,
I thought it was that he was maybe having an affair with her and she was married to the painter.
I mean, either way, he walks in on two people just having sex, and the woman notices that he is there, and she's just like, shh, don't make any noise. I'm doing sex right now.
Right. Or even more than that, it seems like she's like, oh, don't leave. Check this out.
It's funny that all of this is inconsequential to what the plot supposedly is.
Oh, yeah.
Everything is.
Yes. And that's another moment where he's found out, although you could argue that maybe he's going over there because he thinks he's going to talk to her about what he's found out, but she's busy having sex. But it's still another moment where it's like, this is what he's doing instead of trying to figure out who committed murder.
That should be the priority. Figuring out the murder.
You'd think it would be, but you got to go see the Yardbirds.
Yeah.
I mean, they're about to break up. Jimmy Page is going to leave the band. So
originally he wanted the Velvet Underground, Antonioni.
And the Who, I believe also. That's why Jeff Beck smashes his guitar, because that's a Pete Townsend thing.
Yeah.
And the other one I read there was a band called The In Crowd, who I've never even heard of.
Well, I guess you're not in with the In Crowd.
No, I'm not.
You don't go where the In Crowd goes.
I don't. Wherever they are, I'm the opposite of that.
You're in the out crowd.
Yeah. There's no crowd. It's just me. Anyway.
Alone. Blowing up pictures and solving murders.
Right. Or not solving murders.
Well, Josh, I think we've taken this as far as
you don't have anything else to offer here.
No, I've tried to, to dissect it with you, and it's gotten me nowhere.
Yeah, I think trying to not that people don't. I mean, this is certainly one of the most heavily analyzed movies around, or certainly that we've talked about. But I do think that the more you kind of try to pick it apart, the less gratifying it is in some way, because it's really just this mood piece. And I think that's what Antonioni is going for in his other movies that have little to no plot. And the issue here is sort of expectations of something different.
Yeah, I mean, we always talk about placing things in their time and context, and I think we're having difficulty doing it with this one, but we can only do what we can based on when and how we viewed it.
Well, right, and I think you can see what the context was there from what the response was from critics at the time, and I think it's interesting again to point that out, that it wasn't just that it was brilliant, that it was already exactly what we're talking about here, that some people think this is brilliant and other people think this is pretentious nonsense.
Right. And maybe he wants that. That's a good dichotomy of reactions.
I mean, people were talking about it. Obviously, it got him a lot of attention, and its reputation has held steady for 50 plus years.
Yeah. I still think, it's just a filmmaker that I just am having trouble relating to. So having watched multiple pieces from him.
Yeah. And I kind of feel the same. I have only seen that other one. And even though I like that more, it was sort of an effort to get into it and to find something that I liked about it. And I don't imagine going into another Antonioni movie, I would probably feel like I don't expect to be really into this.
Like, he wants you to watch, but from like a removed standpoint almost.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what this is too, in a way. If it's look at the 60s London scene, the mod scene, is that he's capturing it, but he's also sort of stepped back from it and judging it in a certain way.
So what are we rating this out of?
I don't know. 5. I feel like we should rate it out of something completely irrelevant, like 5 invisibly mimed tennis balls or
Sure.
something.
How about out of Porky's?
Oh,
5 Porky's.
5 Porky's.
There might have been 5 Porky
There probably
movies,
was.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to rate it out of invisible tennis balls, Dave, because it's going to confuse the audience if I give it a low Porky's rating, because Porky's itself gets such a high rating.
Good point. Good
So,
point.
it only gets 2 from me. I kept trying to find reasons to, because it's technically so good, bump it up, but the story and just, it's such a slog to get through 2 invisible tennis balls.
I think I rated it a 2 when I first saw it. And I'm going to give it to 2.5 this time because I think I was able to maybe appreciate some of those other elements a little more this time around because I wasn't so concerned about the plot being anything, but I still don't really care for it. So, and I almost can't even recommend it other than from a historical, like this movie is notable standpoint if you want to be familiar with a famous, important director. But as a piece of entertainment, I just don't think there's much to it.
Yeah, agreed.
So Dave, how did you rate this?
I'm going with 2.5 also. And I tried, but it is what it is.
What happened here? When did you guys become so much more lenient than I am now? I feel like it used to be the opposite. I used to give things much like a little more looser with my rating system, and now you guys are 2.5 in everything that I'm like 2ing on, and it's just,
I
I mean, it's a minor difference, really.
The pandemic's changed us all.
I guess so. We'll come back in a moment and talk about the legacy of Blowup. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1967, we've been talking about the Palme d'Or winner from the Cannes Film Festival, Michelangelo Antonioni's Blowup, which we all don't like. So I feel like this is reminiscent of our episode on Paris, Texas, which was also a Palme d'Or winner that is also regarded as this brilliant film that we also didn't like, although Dave loved. But
yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, but Jason, you and I didn't care for that. And I feel like that's another movie with all these artistic ambitions that didn't work for us.
Well, one, Josh, I commend you on making Dave so irrelevant in the overall opinion of things on this podcast. But yeah, we got a lot of blowback from that one.
Yeah.
A lot of people told us what dumb idiots we were. So let's see. Maybe this time around, the audience will tell us what we missed again, because I just not feeling it, bro.
Yeah, maybe they'll blow up our social media to talk about our complete lack of sophistication about this film. So legacy-wise, Antonioni, I mean, before this movie was already regarded as this major, important world cinema figure. As we were saying, this was his first English language film. And I mean, he remained a major figure, although he slowed down a lot after this film. And I mean, he made a couple more, I think, super notable movies. The Passenger that we've talked about in 1975, I think that was, as well as Zabriskie Point, which I haven't seen, but that's another very well-known Antonioni film. Both of those also in English. And then he kept working kind of sporadically later in his life. His final film is called Beyond the Clouds that came out in 1995. So as much as we've been negative on him, I feel like I should see some more of Antonioni's most notable films.
I agree. I should too. And I did try. And it these 2 experiences were just so efforted for me. It makes me not want to do it now. But I mean, eventually I'm sure I'll get to another one. And I just need a break. We need a break right now.
Yeah, that's fair. No, we put in some effort here to understand Antonioni for this episode, and now we can put him aside.
Yeah, it's
Get back to him eventually later.
Yeah, maybe in 6 months we text an Antonioni movie and be like, WYD, what you doing? Just checking.
I mean, I feel like booty calls are something that Antonioni movies understand.
Especially this one. And speaking of which, Josh, this was the first British feature to show full frontal female nudity.
Oh.
So talk about a legacy
Yeah.
relating to Porky's.
Oh yeah.
It is. Well, I mean, as we're saying earlier, I mean, this was a key movie in the crumbling of their production code, which was
Yes.
something that was happening at the time anyway.
Yes.
But this whole year is the last gasp of that, and this is a major part of it.
And yeah, I agree. That is a big, huge deal. And it inspired a number of movies. Obviously, The Conversation, which I know you love, right?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I haven't seen it in a long time, but I remember just really loving that movie more even than other, like the Godfather movies, even in terms of Coppola films.
I like it. I want to rewatch it, but I feel like The Conversation's a better interpretation of the themes than this one is.
Yeah, I agree. And also even more directly, Blowout, the Brian De Palma film with John Travolta as a sound engineer who captures a murder. Didn't you and I watch that in our little film club with Tony Macklin?
I feel like I've seen it. The other movie I had read about, which I haven't seen, is The Bird with the Crystal Plumage.
Yeah, which is a Dario Argento film, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, but I can see how the style and the visuals and the sort of lack of interest in a coherent plot could influence Argento and Giallo films in general here. I can absolutely see that.
Yeah, Blowout I have such vague memories of. I think that deserves another watch, and De Palma obviously a major figure as well.
Yeah, I like De Palma a lot, although I mean he's very polarizing, and I think his movies are either brilliant or brilliantly terrible, but always worth seeing. And one thing that Blowout does have, I think, is a solution to this mystery, which
Right.
this movie doesn't have. So it's got one up on it there.
Vanessa Redgrave, we've already mentioned, just as regaled as an actress as there is, and that's kind of what another bummer for me in this is that, like, we've all seen her, but this is one of her most well-known roles. I wanted to see what it was all about, and it just wasn't about much.
Yeah, this was an early breakout for her. And I mean, obviously she's been in dozens and dozens and dozens of movies and still works. I think she's got 2 movies in post-production now, still set to come out. So she's still very busy. But yeah, I don't know that this movie is necessarily making great use of her talents.
One thing I got to say about her is at the time she was filming this, she was also in a play, I think, on the West End called The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. And how amazing to be doing 8 shows a week and filming a movie at the same time. That's pretty impressive.
That is, although maybe speaks to that this movie wasn't asking that much of her. Yeah, and side note, the movie of The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie with Maggie Smith, brilliant. Love it. Great movie.
Well, there you go.
David Hemmings, as you said, he was kind of an unknown here. And this movie was a huge hit. And so it was kind of poised to make him a big star, and that didn't quite happen.
Always a working actor, working producer, though. He did just fine for himself.
He did. He became a TV director later in his career, did a lot of 80s action shows like The A-Team and Airwolf and stuff. I will say that I recently watched or rewatched a movie that he did soon after this from 1968, Jane Fonda and Barbarella, which is, again, is great. And Jane Fonda is great as hilariously ridiculous sci-fi psychedelic movie in which he plays a character named Dildano. And that's on purpose.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Great movie. And just the image, I feel like this movie, again, if you think of the stereotype of the swinging 60s in London, this movie has a huge indelible part of that is an influence on pop culture in that way.
Isn't it also, though, the stereotype of 60s art film that really says nothing, that's supposed to say a lot?
That too, yes. Yeah. But again, I kept thinking of Austin Powers the whole time. And I feel like, if you're going to create some sort of parody of the 60s, this is somewhere where you would look.
And I kept thinking, like I said, of the true crime explosion and reality TV and how this character would fit in perfectly as a character in that world.
Except he would have to solve the crime, or at least care about solving the crime.
Yes, there you go.
And finally, the Yardbirds broke up in 1968.
But their music lives on, and at least Page and Beck they did all right for themselves.
They did all right for themselves, so. Yeah. And this was, it was a very short amount of time that they were both in the band, and so this is sort of the most notable thing from that period of the band, which is weird. So that's all I got. Anything else on the legacy here, Jason?
Nope.
All right. And of course, the ultimate legacy of this film is being greeted with a shrug on Awesome Movie Year.
Hey, man, we tried.
We did. And that is Blowup. And that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. Check us out on social media.
Yeah, you should check us out. I'm Jason Harris Comedy on Facebook and Instagram. J Harris Comedy on Twitter. My website, Go for Jason. Someone should blow that up.
Oh.
And we're at awesomemovieyear.com. Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram. Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter.
You can find me at Josh Bell. You said that as if there was like something more to come.
See, Josh, that's the real mystery here.
You can find me at joshbellhateseverything.com, at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, and at Signal Bleed on Twitter. And listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And check out our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where I'm sure somebody likes this movie in there.
I'm sure. And has this movie ever come up as a puzzle piece? I feel like this is an influential movie that would show up there at some point.
It has not, but that Last Night at Marienbad did once. So
Last year. Oh, yeah.
Last year.
For what?
For Capone. And that was the one that Josh Trank actually replied and said how excited he was that we said that.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
How about
nice
that?
work. Now that makes me not want to see Capone. But what are we seeing and talking about in our next episode?
Well,
Jason?
Josh, the musical themes are a little more, let's say, thoroughly explored in this next one. It's our documentary of 1967, D.A. Pennebaker, Don't Look Back, Bob Dylan.
So tune in next time for Don't Look Back, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.